B Corp has been going from this sort of niche thing that very few people knew about to seemingly appearing on many of the products and packaging that I see every day. I look at those brands and I immediately get a much more warm and fuzzy feeling about that brand because I know what they've been through to achieve it. It's certainly helped, for me, solidify a lot of values we already sort of have as a company and given a lot more of a concrete framework to assess where we maybe already do the right things and just clarify that a bit, but also to draw attention to areas where we didn't have so much clarity of what would good look like. And it gets really deep on some things, like pushing us to have conversations with various stakeholders in the business we wouldn't normally talk to about these matters, and pushing us to set in stone certain fundamental paperwork we have that kind of the business is built on. And so I think it's been a really good opportunity to clarify a lot of things there.
Welcome to the EcoSend podcast. Stories from marketers, founders, and changemakers leading businesses for a better world.
The first quarter of the year has really whipped past, and along with it, our fourth season of the EcoSend podcast. We've had some of my favorite guests of the show so far, ranging from CEOs to marketers, designers, all working really hard to put the environment and their values at the center of their business. And despite all the craziness going on in the world, it's been very encouraging to know there are so many people out there doing their best to make a difference. And so I'm delighted to invite James for a special wrap-up episode of the EcoSend podcast and a chance to reflect on our guests and lessons learned across the fourth season. If you happen to be tuning in for the first time, the EcoSend podcast is a platform where we interview founders, marketers, and leaders in sustainability who are creating more climate and community-focused businesses. My name is Chris. I'm the customer success lead here at EcoSend. And today in the hot seat, I'm delighted to welcome back James, our host and CEO at EcoSend, to talk us through his learnings, both from running the EcoSend podcast and from running EcoSend itself. James, great to have you here. How are you doing today?
Hi, Chris. Pleasure to be here. Amazing. I can't believe already done another series of the podcast. It's flown by. So yeah, excited to talk about it all and share all of our learnings from this season. It's been a great one. Yeah.
All right, well, let's jump straight in. I think one thing that's really inspired me from all our guests this season, and I'm thinking in particular guests like Julien, Anne-Cécile, and Magali, is this deliberate refusal to work with companies who don't align with their values and missions. That can involve outlining in their mission statement on their website which kinds of companies they will or won't work with, or even point blank refusing to work with companies, even if those companies have big budgets and reach out directly. I think it was Magali who refused LVMH after they sought out her services. One particular quote, I think, from her was, "I refuse to work with shit companies." So,
but doesn't beat around the bush, yeah.
But it does take a lot of bravery and accountability to refuse work like that, and particularly when it does come from big brands with big budgets. And yet it's exactly the kind of real world action that we need in order to create necessary change at scale. So for our first question, what do you think can be done so that the examples like our podcast guests become the norm rather than the outlier?
Yeah, it's a great question actually, Chris, and it's something that's very easy for people to say they want to do. You start a business and you talk about how you want to only service certain clients, but I think very few people and businesses actually can successfully hold their ground when there's real money on the table and real business to be done. And hearing about Magali sort of turning away one of the biggest brands and businesses and in the world is incredibly kind of sets the bar for that kind of attitude. And I think it's a very difficult thing in this climate. When you turn on the news or read about how many businesses are struggling in the wider climate and economy, at least in the UK and around the world. Like, a lot of businesses are struggling to get customers to earn enough to keep the lights on. So to have this kind of approach, it's certainly not for every business, I think, and it's certainly something that requires a huge amount of clarity in one's own strength and in one's own values and purpose. So I think with something like this, it's I think one thing I would say is not to judge a business that doesn't have this approach, because it is a world that, everyone's got their own needs and their own problems to try and get through and solve. But I think it is certainly an aspirational thing for many founders, and something that I am excited to see more and more people seemingly being able to achieve this kind of decision on with whether or not to serve certain businesses. And I think it starts with being very clear on one's own personal values. When you start a business, or maybe even before you start a business, having clarity on one's own personal values and priorities is a really easy thing to say, but very few people have that clarity really with themselves. And I know for me, I'm always working on trying to establish, like, do I have those clear enough for myself? But then obviously those values tend to be inherited by the company. If you're a founder, your values tend to be inherited by the company and the team you build around you. And so I think it's important to start with your own, and then the business values and priorities can often come from that. And then I also think that being in demand, like Magali is, with LVMH approaching her to do some work, fundamentally, like, you don't get that kind of opportunity unless you're doing really, really good work. And so I think for any business, it's, beyond just talking about climate and values, it's like, do the best work you possibly can. That usually involves doing work that you thoroughly enjoy doing. And so if you can find that sweet spot of being clear on your own values, starting a business, doing work that you truly believe in, are passionate about, and from that start doing work that people want to buy, or running a business people want to buy from, then you can kind of earn that right to decide whether or not certain businesses meet those criteria. But I think it's a very hard position to put oneself in, but what a wonderful place it is if you can get to that point, in the current very challenging economic climate a lot of businesses face. And I think it's certainly something that a lot of businesses aspire to do. And when you look at things like the B Corp mark that businesses work towards achieving, a lot of that is about which kinds of companies you want to do business with and which you don't. And it's becoming more and more of a clear-cut thing. There are certain businesses that probably you want to try and steer clear of if you want to truly be a business that upholds those values. So yeah, it's not an easy thing, but I think anyone trying to get down that path, I have huge respect for, because it sure as heck isn't an easy one.
Yeah, I love that sort of starting from personal values and moving out from there. It's supposing the theme of economic challenge and how that interplays with sustainability. I think another theme I really noticed in this season is a lot of innovation in the face of challenge, and a lot of sort of outside of the box thinking. I'm thinking in particular, like Dirk, seeing the challenges of fast fashion, and as a result, creating his t-shirts out of seaweed. Who would have thought? Or maybe like Carina, who saw the extent of wastage in the event industry, and as a result, totally redesigned her business to tackle that issue head on. But yet it still feels like the general cultural focus isn't directed towards innovation, but rather towards business as usual. which is the exact opposite of what we need, because if we maintain the status quo, we maintain our current trajectory, which, as we know, is not headed in a good direction. So what do you think needs to happen for that cultural shift, so the default becomes innovation and addressing the climate challenge, rather than having this small minority of dedicated individuals kind of doing it by themselves?
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting topic to talk about, because I think there's definitely a hugely growing number of businesses that put climate and sustainability and other great things above, or at least at a similar level to profit. But then there's also the vast majority of businesses in the world that still don't, and the profit is king or revenue is king, and everything else is secondary. And I don't know, I like to think of myself as a bit of an optimist, but I think that there's so much opportunity from a business perspective for those founders and entrepreneurs and individuals that want to go and start or work at businesses that are putting something above profit. There's so much innovation to come still, and that those some may see them as constraints, but those constraints can breed the creativity that transforms industries. And I think there's a few things around this. I think one, like, certainly just the more people are talking about values, and especially around sustainability within the business world, that talk is not a bad thing. I think sometimes it's like less talk, more action, but the talking is a really important part, because if people don't feel like they can talk about stuff, or if it's not spoken about at all, then where does that change come from? So I think having more confidence in speaking up about these things, because if we're trying to build a business, we're trying to build it on planet Earth, almost certainly, and other than a few maybe edge cases, but most of us are definitely trying to build a business on planet Earth. So starting businesses that at least acknowledge that planet Earth is in a bit of trouble right now is probably a good idea. So I think there's a lot of communities all around the world popping up that are business leaders talking about this stuff, podcasts, all sorts of stuff that care about this stuff. So I think that's a big thing. I think to your previous question and point, like seeing more businesses refuse to work with, say, companies that are still stuck in old ways, and making it clear that I'm not going to do great work for you because I don't want to work with a business like you, kind of starts maybe shifting some of that power balance, and maybe does start sending shockwaves. I also think that, like, even if people don't want to build businesses that care about the climate and about the planet, there's an element of like regulation starting to come in, at least in Europe and in other parts of the world, that is forcing bigger businesses to start caring about this stuff. So there's an element of that as well, which is like pushing, I think, in the right direction. I'm not usually a big fan of bureaucracy and regulation, but regulation that pushes companies to care, especially at a bigger scale, is, I think, generally, that's a good thing. I would also just say as well, for those who are like really, really cynical and skeptical about climate and why we should care about that as a business, I'm not sure many of those people are necessarily listening to this podcast, but if they are, or if there are sort of team members that don't care, then it's to try and find those things that people do care about within the business, and that the sustainability side can positively influence. And I think really today, like, actually it's not really so much of a trade-off. Like, we're going to do something better for the planet, and that's going to cost us more money, or that's going to cause us to lose potential revenue and profit. There are so many business opportunities from caring about the planet, whether it's cutting costs within a business that owns a fleet of vans or has to run huge warehouses, like thinking about how renewable energy might save you money over time and therefore cut costs, thinking about how consumers want to buy things and the messaging that can appeal to consumers, and how many consumers actively want to seek out brands and companies that care about this stuff. There are so many business opportunities for profit, revenue growth, and cost cutting that, even if someone doesn't care about the planet, there's a very viable financial and economical case often that can be sold. So, if that's what gets someone to do the right thing, then the thing that matters is them doing the right thing, not so much why. So I think there's a bunch of aspects there that hopefully help us push in the right direction one way or another.
I love that. I think it was Maddy Cooper who was talking about sustainability has to talk the language of money, or it has to talk the language of corporations, which is the language of money. And that's the way to get in the door, and for a lot of companies where sustainability maybe isn't the number one thing they think of, it's the bottom line, but you're presenting the business case for sustainability. I love that. And in, I guess, a similar theme of bringing sustainability and values into the company, I know one of the major transitions we've been going through ourselves at EcoSend is our application towards becoming a B Corp, a B Corporation. For everyone who's not familiar, to become B Corp certified, companies have to reach a minimum score of 80, I believe, from an assessment of various social, environmental, and performance criteria. So from this process we're going through at EcoSend, what main lessons have you taken from that so far?
It's interesting bringing up the B Corp process because, I think we've been running the wider business of Go Squared for many, many years, and we haven't always loved the idea of filling in forms. But, when anyone starts a business, you don't necessarily get up and excited for filling in forms. But I think I certainly look at B Corp as something very different to a bunch of form filling. When you look at the businesses who are B Corps today, and that is a rapidly growing number, like B Corp has been going from this sort of niche thing that very few people kind of knew about to seemingly appearing on many of the products and packaging, even office windows that I see every day. I look at those brands and I immediately see that logo, and I get a much more warm and fuzzy feeling about that brand because I know what they've been through to achieve it. And I think there's a lot I respect about B Corp as an initiative, because it's kind of hopefully it can retain this very trusted status, which is a shortcut for consumers to make better choices in the products and services they buy. For us, I think we would be totally doing ourselves a disservice if we sort of saw this as a box ticking exercise that we just need to get through to get that logo. Like, that is absolutely not the spirit of doing this. And I think, I'm sure many companies may start on that journey to think about it and hope that that's the way they can do it. But I think they very quickly realize it's a lot harder than that and might lose that status if that's their mentality. So I think for us, it's certainly helped, for me, solidify a lot of values we already sort of have as a company, and given a lot more of a concrete kind of framework to assess where we maybe already do the right things and just kind of clarify that a bit, but also to draw attention to areas where we probably didn't have so much clarity of what would good look like. And, it gets really deep on some things, like, pushing us to have conversations with various stakeholders in the business we wouldn't normally talk to about these matters, pushing us to set in stone certain fundamental paperwork we have in the business that kind of the business is built on. And so I think it's been a really good opportunity to clarify a lot of things there, and shed some light on areas we overlooked perhaps. And I think, longer term for B Corp, I'm very much hopeful that we can achieve our B Corp status this year, but that I really hope that we get to a point over time where being a B Corp is kind of the norm, and if you're not a B Corp, then what's going on there? Like, why are you not a B Corp, especially at a certain scale? Like, shouldn't all businesses care about the people that they employ, the planet that they operate on, the way they are governed? Like, shouldn't they care about a broader set of things? So I think it's a fantastic framework and movement. I think the more companies joining and being part of it that truly change or improve and use it as a framework for how to do business, I'm excited for that becoming more and more the norm. And I can't wait for us to be part of that movement ourselves. Yeah,
amazing. Yeah, I love how I think it's every 3 years you have to reassess or recomplete the B Corp certification.
I believe so. Yeah.
It's not just something that companies can make a big push for 1 year, sweep some things under the carpet, and get the badge and kind of move on. It's something that's an ongoing assessment, essentially, to make sure that they hold true to those values over a prolonged period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's I don't know, if EcoSend was a restaurant, we would probably be aiming to get a Michelin star at some point. And I think it's a bit like that. You don't just win your Michelin star, you gotta keep your standards high, and then you might earn the right to keep that Michelin star. And I think it's just like that with B Corp. And you know, I think it's critical that B Corp logo, that B in a circle, is trusted by consumers, because if that trust erodes, then I think it would set back not just the B Corp movement, but the movement of like consumer trust in brands doing a good thing in a big way. So yeah, I think, you know, that's why we want to, well, we take it very, very seriously, as I know the vast majority of businesses do as well. So we're excited to get through and hopefully earn our place in the hall of B Corp fame soon.
Just with the kitchen analogy, just trying to think who's Gordon Ramsay within the company.
Don't look at me, Chris. Don't look at me.
So I guess we're 1 quarter into the year. There's still plenty to kind of play for the rest of 2024. And imagine we'll have a wrap-up episode, you know, somewhere towards the end of the year. What would you like to happen between now and the end of 2024 to consider this year a success?
Yeah, I think you know, I sometimes am a bit rubbish on estimating timeframes, but I think a lot of what we were just talking about with B Corp I would really like to see playing out within the industry, and I would really like to see. I think there's still, especially for software companies and tech companies, very few that even acknowledge any existence of this concept of digital sustainability. Like, it's extremely few and far between the number of companies in the tech world that actually care about climate and sustainability, to the point where you could be forgiven for thinking there's no such thing as having a carbon footprint as a digital business. And that just simply isn't true. And so I really think we will have done a good job this year if we can encourage more tech businesses, digital businesses, to be aware of this and have some sort of viewpoint on this. I'm not saying everyone needs to be perfect by the end of the year, but I think growing the awareness of that is something we have a real opportunity to make a dent in. And to be honest, going back to some of those earlier points we were talking about, every business operates, again, almost every business operates on planet Earth. And we really, really should all have some sort of comment or viewpoint on what we're doing about that and whether we're okay with how the state of the planet is. I would really like to see more businesses sharing their views on that and making that part of their kind of ethos. And I think that's part of the whole discussion and vocalizing things and talking about climate that is so important, because the more people talking about it and voicing it, especially in the world of business, the less of weird or odd thing it is to be discussing. So I think that's a big thing, and from that stems more and more knowledge and education, because when you start talking about things, you start making mistakes and you start learning and you start gradually educating yourselves, your team on these matters. And that's the journey we've been on. Like when we started EcoSend, we knew an absolute fraction of what we know today, and we still absolutely do not know it all. No one knows it all. But we're still, on a huge journey here for our own education and learning. And it's overcoming that fear of talking about climate and saying the wrong thing, which is a big deal. I also think for us, we have a huge opportunity because of the number of customers we work with who are, well, they're using EcoSend, they're usually marketing professionals. I think marketers have this very unique position, perhaps opportunity, perhaps responsibility for how they communicate about climate. There is this sort of, I would say, almost like a balance of like, at one end you've got greenwashing and, saying you're eco-friendly because you make your plastic bottles with a green label and recycle like 20% of the plastic label that's on that label, and hey, we're doing a great job. And on the other side, you've got companies that truly want to do the right thing and are doing the right thing, but are so afraid to say anything that they're kind of the green hushing, which is a topic we've heard on the podcast quite a few times. And I think for marketers, there's this huge pressure in a lot of companies to figure out the balance on that line. And on one side, they've got people demanding, maybe a boss that's demanding sell more, and other parts of the company demanding that they have a climate message. Other parts of business that are very financially driven, consumers wanting something else and responding to certain messaging, and threading a very difficult thread of how to communicate about climate matters and sustainability. And I think we have an opportunity to bring more of those people together, to have more conversations, to share more of what we're learning and learn from that great community of people about how to do this well and how to handle some of those difficult conversations that often happen internally. Because I truly believe most people want to do the right thing, but sometimes the incentives and needs within a business are changing rapidly, are conflicting within a company, and when a brand gets called out for something, that can be a really big problem. But also there's some great brands doing some great work that are truly doing brilliant things that need to be held up high as great aspirational brands that we could all look to for inspiration. So I think I would love to see the level of knowledge about climate within the marketing world just continue to grow and grow, because I think as a whole population, we will benefit from that. And marketing does not have to be this evil force that is forcing people to buy more stuff that they don't need. It can help people make better decisions. It can be helping to drive the change we need to see.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's something one of our previous podcast guests, Claudia, from Conscious Marketing Movement, we're talking about a lot of how marketing doesn't have to be this manipulation of and fear-based tactics of making people feel insecure and selling them products as a result. Marketing can really be a force of good in the sustainability space, with kind of spreading awareness and sort of more conscious marketing.
Absolutely, yeah.
James, wrapping up as always, I think with my favorite question, if you had to pick out one lesson from one guest in particular that really stood out for you this season, what would it be?
It's always incredibly difficult. We've had, 10 episodes and 10 fantastic guests. I can't believe this series when we had Dirk talking about seaweed t-shirts. Like, that was an eye-opener. We had Carina opening my eyes to the world of events and how much, like, when you go to a conference, how much stuff is just bought for that conference and chucked away after. We had Maddy making some serious changes in the wider business world, which is often much more slow moving, and seeing someone like Maddy championing change was incredibly inspiring. I think if I had to pick someone, I would say one of the ones I enjoyed the most, one of the episodes I enjoyed the most, because I think I almost spat my tea out with laughter, was Julien, who really brought such a fun energy to the topic of sustainability. And I think the single best thing I took from his episode was just that you can't bore people into making change, and you can't make people, like, telling people off is not really a great way to inspire change in the world. And I think Julien gave the example of, like, Thrift Shop, the song being a great, a little bit of a rendition, which I'm not going to attempt. But you know, that song being, like, one of the best adverts for buying used clothing, like, being enjoyable, being fun, being entertaining, making it cool, like, that is what we need to get to. Like, changing the world by telling people off and punishing them or making them feel bad is not going to get us very far. Inspiring consumers, giving them something to get excited about by making different choices, I think is a very optimistic and positive way forward. And I would love to I keep thinking about Julien's advice in that episode, because I think, it makes me happy, and I hope we can all do a bit more of that over the coming weeks and months.
I think it was definitely my favorite episode as well. And what was he saying about you can't convince people to buy more sustainable clothes by telling them, in order to be more sustainable, you have to buy less clothes and look like shit.
yeah exactly. Yeah.
James, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, as always, for coming on the podcast for our wrap-up episode. Where can people find you to keep in touch with what you're up to?
Thank you, Chris. No, always a pleasure. I always love being a guest on the show. It's great. We should do this more. Honestly, if you want to follow the journey, just head to the EcoSend website. There's a lot of me on there if you're interested, but there's a lot of all of us and what we're doing, from our CSR days to the podcast to what we're working on the EcoSend platform as well. So that's probably one of the best places. But tap in James Skill on LinkedIn if you want to follow me on there, and all the other channels. You can find me around the web. But check us out on EcoSend, and we'd love to have you as part of our wonderful community that's growing and hopefully making the world a little bit better.
Thanks, James. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to this special edition episode. We will look forward to being back with season 5 of the EcoSend podcast. We've got a lot of fantastic guests already lined up to share their wisdom and their stories about building better businesses and making the world a better place. So we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again, James.
Cheers, Chris. See you soon.